I never thought decorating for Christmas would land me in a full-blown war with my homeowner association. But here I was, standing on my ladder at 6 in the morning, stringing up another 50 LED lights while my neighbor Karen Patterson watched from across the street with her phone already pressed to her ear. My name is Ryan Crawford, and I had lived in Meadowbrook Hills, a supposedly charming subdivision in Aurora, Colorado, for 3 years. The neighborhood itself was beautiful, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes nestled against the Rocky Mountain foothills. Most of my neighbors were decent people who minded their own business, but Karen Patterson was not most people. She was the vice president of our HOA and had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our covenant with the enthusiasm of a medieval inquisitor. The trouble started on December 1st, the day I put up my Christmas decorations. I had spent the entire weekend stringing lights along my roofline, wrapping them around the columns on my front porch, and arranging a modest display of illuminated reindeer on my lawn. Nothing excessive, nothing garish, just a normal, festive display that would make any reasonable person smile. I used white LED lights primarily, with some multicolored accents around the windows. The whole setup probably used about 300 lights total, well within what I considered tasteful. I was admiring my handiwork that Sunday evening, a cup of hot cocoa in hand, when I saw Karen marching across the street toward my house. She wore a puffy vest over a turtleneck sweater, and her short blonde hair was pulled back with a headband that looked like it had been purchased specifically to complete her suburban mom uniform. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Ryan," she called out before she even reached my driveway, "we need to discuss your light display." I set down my cocoa on the porch railing. "What about it?" She stopped at the edge of my lawn, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA covenant from her oversized purse. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines, holiday decorations must be tasteful and not create excessive visual disturbance to neighboring properties. "And you think my lights are excessive?" I asked, genuinely confused. The Hendersons 2 houses down had a full nativity scene with spotlights. The Martins across the street had inflatable snowmen covering half their yard. "I have received complaints," Karen said, which was her favorite phrase. She claimed to have received complaints about everything from people parking their cars on the street to children playing basketball in their own driveways. "From who?" I asked. "That information is confidential," she replied, flipping through her papers. "However, I am here to inform you that your current display exceeds the acceptable number of lights as outlined in our seasonal decoration addendum." "There is no specific number mentioned in the covenant," I said. "I had read the thing cover to cover when I bought the house. It just says decorations should be tasteful, which is completely subjective." Karen's face reddened slightly. "The HOA board has determined that more than 200 individual light bulbs constitutes excessive. Show me where that is written." "It was decided at our last board meeting." "Which I was not informed about," I pointed out. "And even if it was decided, you cannot retroactively enforce a rule that was not in place when I put up my decorations." Karen snapped her folder shut. "I am giving you until tomorrow evening to reduce your light count to comply with community standards. Otherwise, you will receive a formal citation and potential fines." She turned on her heel and marched back across the street before I could respond. I stood there on my porch, feeling my blood pressure rise. This was typical Karen behavior. She had cited people for leaving their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. She had sent violation notices to families who let their grass grow a quarter-inch too long. She had even tried to fine the elderly couple at the end of the block for having a vegetable garden that she claimed violated the landscaping requirements. I went inside and called my buddy Marcus, who lived over in the Stapleton neighborhood and had dealt with his own HOA nightmares. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "She just made up a number and expects you to comply." "That is exactly what happened." "Man, that is insane. You need to fight this. Check your covenant for anything about rule changes requiring homeowner notification." I spent the rest of the evening reading through the HOA documents. Sure enough, Section 3 clearly stated that any new rules or amendments to existing rules required written notification to all homeowners at least 30 days before taking effect, and any rule affecting more than 50% of homeowners required a community vote. The next morning, I drafted a polite but firm email to the HOA board, copying Karen and the president, Gerald Thompson. I cited the specific sections of our covenant that Karen had violated by trying to enforce an unwritten rule without proper notification. I concluded by stating that my decorations would remain as they were. Karen responded within an hour. Her email was curt and filled with barely concealed rage. She informed me that I was being difficult and uncooperative, and that the board would be discussing my flagrant disregard for community standards at their next meeting. She also mentioned that I would be receiving a formal violation notice in the mail. That is when I decided that if Karen wanted to play games, I would play along. But I would play to win. I went to Home Depot that afternoon and bought 10 additional strings of lights. Each string contained 50 bulbs. I got home and immediately started stringing them up along my fence line and around the trees in my front yard. By the time Karen got home from wherever she spent her days making other people miserable, my house was noticeably brighter. She was outside my house within minutes. "What do you think you are doing? Decorating for Christmas?" I said cheerfully, standing on my ladder as I wrapped lights around a blue spruce. "It is the most wonderful time of the year, after all. You are in direct violation of HOA guidelines. Show me the guideline I am violating." "The actual written guideline, not something you made up last week." Karen sputtered. "This is harassment. Me decorating my own property is harassment. That is an interesting legal theory." She pulled out her phone and took several photos of my house, then stormed off without another word. I figured that would be the end of it for the day, but I was wrong. Around 8 that evening, I received a knock on my door. It was Gerald Thompson, the HOA president. Gerald was actually a decent guy, a retired accountant who had somehow gotten roped into leading the HOA board. He looked tired and apologetic. "Ryan, can we talk?" he asked. I invited him in and offered him coffee, which he accepted. We sat in my living room and he sighed heavily before speaking. "Karen has been calling me nonstop for the past 3 hours. She is demanding that I personally issue you a citation and fine." "For what exactly?" "She claims you are deliberately antagonizing her and violating community standards." "Gerald, have you actually looked at my decorations? They are just Christmas lights, normal, regular Christmas lights. There is nothing offensive or excessive about them." Gerald rubbed his temples. "I know, I drove by before coming here. Your house looks nice, festive, but Karen is insistent that we have a light limit rule, which does not exist in writing and was never properly voted on or communicated to homeowners." "I know," Gerald said again. "Look, between you and me, Karen has been pushing for more and more restrictions over the past year. She wants to turn this neighborhood into some kind of sterile showroom. But she is the vice president, and she is very vocal at board meetings. It is exhausting." "So what are you going to do?" I asked. "I am not going to issue you a citation," Gerald said firmly. "Your decorations are not in violation of any actual rule. but I need to ask you, as a favor, to maybe not add any more lights. Just to keep the peace." I considered this. Gerald was a good guy who was stuck in a bad situation, but giving in to Karen's unreasonable demands would only encourage her to continue her reign of suburban terror. "I appreciate you coming over, Gerald, and I respect you, but I cannot agree to that. Karen needs to learn that she cannot just make up rules and expect everyone to follow them. If I back down now, what is to stop her from deciding next month that no one can have wreaths on their doors or that we can only use certain colors for our house paint?" Gerald nodded slowly. "I understand, and honestly, part of me agrees with you. Just be prepared for this to get ugly. Karen does not like losing." He left shortly after, and I felt a pang of guilt for making his life harder, but I also felt certain that I was doing the right thing. This was not just about Christmas lights. It was about standing up to petty tyranny. The formal violation notice arrived in my mailbox 2 days later. It was a professionally printed form with my name and address typed in, along with a description of my alleged violation. Excessive holiday lighting display creating visual disturbance to neighboring properties. The notice stated that I had 10 days to remedy the violation or face a fine of $100 per day until compliance was achieved. I took a photo of the notice and posted it on our neighborhood's Facebook group with a caption explaining the situation. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments. Most of my neighbors were supportive, expressing frustration with Karen's overreach. A few people shared their own stories of ridiculous citations they had received. One person mentioned that Karen had threatened to fine them for parking their own car in their own driveway because she thought the vehicle looked unsightly. Karen, of course, was also in the Facebook group. She responded to my post with a long, rambling comment about how rules existed for a reason, and how people who refused to follow them were destroying property values and the integrity of the neighborhood. Several people responded to her, pointing out that there was no actual rule about light counts. She deleted her comments and left the group entirely. That evening, I made another trip to Home Depot. I bought 10 more strings of lights. When I got home, I methodically added them to my display, creating additional layers of illumination along my roofline and wrapping more lights around the support beams of my porch. My house was beginning to look like it could guide ships to shore, and I loved it. The next morning, Karen was outside at dawn, taking more photos. I waved to her from my window while drinking my coffee. She did not wave back. This became our new routine. Every day, I would add 50 more lights to my display. Sometimes I would add them in the morning before work, sometimes in the evening when I got home. I started getting creative with placement, outlining my garage door, wrapping lights around my mailbox post, creating lit pathways along my walkway. My electric bill was going to be astronomical, but I did not care. This had become a matter of principle. By December 10th, my house was the brightest thing in the neighborhood. Drivers would slow down as they passed by, some taking photos, others just staring in awe. Kids in the neighborhood loved it. Parents would walk by with their children in the evenings, and I would hear the delighted squeals and see the wonder in their eyes. That alone made the whole thing worthwhile. Karen, meanwhile, was escalating. She sent me daily emails, each one more frantic than the last. She claimed I was creating a safety hazard. She said the brightness was disturbing the local wildlife. She even suggested that my lights might interfere with aviation, because we lived relatively close to Buckley Space Force Base, which was absurd on multiple levels. She also started showing up at my house at random times, measuring the exact distance between my lights and the property line, taking detailed notes in a spiral-bound notebook that she carried everywhere. My neighbors started joking that she was planning to write a dissertation on my Christmas decorations. On December 12th, I received a letter from a lawyer. My heart sank when I saw it, worried that the HOA had actually decided to take legal action. But when I opened it, I discovered it was from a law firm representing 3 of my neighbors, offering to support me if I needed legal representation against the HOA. They explained that they were tired of Karen's behavior and saw my situation as an opportunity to push back against her overreach. They offered their services pro bono, just to stick it to her. I called the number on the letter and spoke with Jennifer Martinez, one of the attorneys. She specialized in property law and had dealt with HOA cases before. "Your situation is pretty straightforward," Jennifer explained. The HOA cannot enforce rules that do not exist in writing. They also cannot create new rules without proper notification and procedure. If they try to fine you, we can fight it easily. "What about the violation notice I received?" I asked. "That is essentially toilet paper. It has no legal standing. They can send you notices all day long, but they cannot actually collect fines for violating a non-existent rule." I felt relieved but also emboldened. I thanked Jennifer and told her I would keep her number handy. That afternoon, I bought more lights. By now, I had to start shopping at different stores because the local Home Depot was running low on outdoor light strings. I hit up Lowe's, Target, and even Walmart. I was single-handedly keeping the Christmas light industry in business. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting for December 15th. The meeting was held at the Neighborhood Community Center, a small building near the subdivision entrance that was usually used for holiday parties and garage sale organizing sessions. I arrived early and found about 30 other homeowners already there, which was unusual. Normally, board meetings attracted maybe 5 people at most. Karen looked shocked and dismayed at the turnout. Gerald looked relieved. The other 3 board members, Michelle Santos, David Park, and Robert Chen, looked confused about why they were there. Karen called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about neighborhood standards and property values. She had prepared a PowerPoint presentation with photos of my house taken from various angles and distances. Some of the shots were taken at night and showed my house blazing with light against the dark sky. To be honest, it looked pretty spectacular. "As you can see," Karen said, clicking through her slides, "this excessive display is completely out of character for our community. It is garish, it is inappropriate, and it sets a dangerous precedent for future holiday seasons." Michelle raised her hand. "Karen, I drove by Ryan's house before coming here. It just looks like he really likes Christmas. What is the actual problem?" "The problem is that he is in violation of our guidelines." "Which guidelines specifically?" asked David. Karen faltered. "The general standards of taste and visual harmony." "Those are subjective terms," Robert pointed out. "We cannot enforce subjective rules without clear definitions." I raised my hand, and Gerald acknowledged me. "If I may, I would like to point out that the HOA covenant explicitly states that any new rules or amendments require proper notification and, in many cases, a homeowner vote. No such process was followed before Karen decided there should be a light limit." Several people in the audience nodded and murmured in agreement. Karen's face was turning red. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have been adding lights specifically because of Karen's continued harassment and her attempts to enforce rules that do not exist. This started as a normal holiday display. It has become a statement about homeowner rights and protection against HOA overreach." The room erupted in applause. Karen looked like she might spontaneously combust. Gerald cleared his throat. I think it is clear that we need to table this discussion. Karen, you cannot issue violations for rules that are not in our covenant. Ryan, your decorations are not in violation of any written rule. This matter is closed. I disagree, Karen shouted. I am calling for a vote to implement an immediate light limit of 200 bulbs per property. That is not how this works, Gerald said patiently. We cannot vote on new rules without proper notification period and documentation. We have been over this. Karen gathered her papers and laptop, stuffing them into her bag with jerky, angry movements. This is absurd. I am being completely undermined. You are all going to regret this when property values plummet because the neighborhood looks like a carnival. She stormed out of the meeting. After she left, several people came up to thank me for standing up to her. One elderly woman named Dorothy told me that Karen had been making her life miserable for 2 years, constantly citing her for minor infractions, and making her feel unwelcome in her own home. You are doing the Lord's work, young man, Dorothy said, patting my arm. Someone needed to stand up to that woman. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also knowing that this was far from over. Karen was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to find that someone had unplugged several of my light strings from the outdoor outlets. The plugs were just pulled out and left lying on the ground. I had no proof it was Karen, but I had a pretty strong suspicion. I plugged everything back in and made a mental note to get some outlet locks. That evening, I added 50 more lights, as had become my daily tradition. I was up to well over 1,000 lights at this point. My house was visible from space, probably. My neighbor to the left, an IT guy named Sam, came over while I was working. "Dude, this is hilarious," he said. "Karen drove by like 6 times today just to stare at your house. She looks like she is going to have a stroke." "Good," I said. "Maybe she will finally leave everyone alone." "Hey, if you need help adding more lights, let me know. I've got a bunch in my garage from when my kids were little. You can have them." I thanked Sam, and sure enough, the next day he brought over 4 boxes of lights he had been storing. My wife had left him after their divorce and never came back for her decorating stuff. He seemed happy to see the lights put to good use, especially in service of annoying Karen. December 20th arrived, and I had been adding lights daily for nearly 3 weeks. My electric meter was spinning like a roulette wheel, but I did not care. My house had become a neighborhood attraction. People from other subdivisions were driving through just to see it. Some families started bringing their kids by every evening. A few people even left thank you notes in my mailbox, expressing appreciation for the joy and wonder my display brought their children. But Karen was not done. On December 21st, I came home from work to find a city inspector's car parked in front of my house. My stomach dropped. Karen must have called the city to report some kind of code violation. The inspector, a middle-aged man named Tom, was walking around my property with a clipboard. I approached him and introduced myself. "I am just doing a routine inspection based on a complaint we received," Tom explained. "Someone reported potential electrical hazards related to your holiday lighting. Everything is plugged into GFCI outlets, and I am using outdoor-rated lights and extension cords," I said. "I am pretty careful about electrical safety." Tom spent about 20 minutes examining my setup. He checked my outlets, looked at the connections, and even used some kind of testing device on a few of the circuits. Finally, he made some notes on his clipboard and turned to me. "Everything looks fine. You are well within code. The outlets are properly rated, your lights are appropriate for outdoor use, and I do not see any safety hazards. Whoever called this in was wasting everyone's time." "Let me guess," I said. The complaint came from someone named Karen Patterson. Tom gave me a knowing look but did not confirm or deny. I have been doing this job for 15 years. I can spot a neighbor dispute from a mile away. Your lights are fine. Enjoy your Christmas. After Tom left, I was angrier than I had been through this whole ordeal. Calling the city inspector was a new low, even for Karen. She was trying to use government resources to harass me. That crossed a line. I called Jennifer Martinez, the attorney who had offered to help. Can the HOA or Karen face consequences for filing false reports? I asked. Potentially, Jennifer said. If you can prove a pattern of harassment, you might have grounds for a civil suit. Keep documenting everything. Save all emails. Take photos of her photographing your house. Keep the violation notices. Build a case. I started keeping detailed records of every interaction with Karen. I set up a security camera that captured my front yard and the street, which would record any time she came by to take photos or measure things. I created a folder on my computer with all her emails, organized by date. Meanwhile, I continued adding lights. By December 23rd, I estimated I had close to 1,500 individual bulbs illuminating my property. The display was absurd and glorious. I had lights everywhere possible. My house looked like Christmas had exploded all over it. On Christmas Eve morning, I was having coffee and admiring my handiwork when I saw Karen marching across the street again. This was it, I thought, the final confrontation. I opened my door before she could knock. "What can I do for you, Karen?" She thrust a piece of paper at me. It was another violation notice, this one claiming I was in violation of city noise ordinances. Apparently, she had filed a complaint claiming that my lights were creating a humming noise that disturbed her peace and quiet. "My lights do not make noise," I said. "They are LED lights." "They are silent. The transformers make noise," she insisted. "I do not have transformers. These are simple plug-in LED strings." Karen's eye twitched. "You are destroying this neighborhood. You are making us a laughingstock. Do you know how many people are driving through here every night? We have had traffic jams on our street because of you." "And is that not wonderful?" I said. "People are finding joy in something during the holidays. Families are making memories. Children are experiencing wonder. What exactly is wrong with that? It is inappropriate. It is excessive. It is against the rules. Show me the rule, Karen. Show me one actual written rule that I am violating." She could not, of course. Her hands were shaking as she pointed a finger at me. "You have not heard the last of this. I will find a way to make you comply." "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly, aware that my security camera was recording this interaction. Karen realized she had gone too far. She stepped back, composed herself, and said, "It is a promise. Rules matter. Order matters. People like you who think they can just do whatever they want are what is wrong with this country." She left, and I closed my door feeling a mix of anger and pity. Karen was so consumed with control and rules that she could not see anything good or joyful in what I was doing. She saw only disobedience and chaos. Christmas Day was peaceful. I spent it with my family. My sister, Zara Jenkins, and her husband drove up from Colorado Springs, and we had a nice dinner. In the evening, we sat on my porch with hot chocolate and watched as families drove by slowly, their kids pressing their faces against car windows to see all the lights. It made everything worth it. The day after Christmas, I took down all my decorations. Every single light, every extension cord, every zip tie and mounting clip. It took me the entire day, but by evening my house looked normal again. I carefully packed everything away in storage bins in my garage. I thought that would be the end of it. I had made my point. The holidays were over, and life could return to normal. but I underestimated Karen's determination to have the last word. On December 27th, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a bill for accumulated fines totaling $3,000. According to the letter, I had been in violation of community standards for 26 days at $100 per day, plus administrative fees. The letter stated that if I did not pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. I immediately called Jennifer Martinez. "They are bluffing," she said after I read her the letter. "They cannot fine you for violating rules that do not exist. Do not pay anything. Forward me all the documentation and I will draft a response." Jennifer sent a letter to the HOA board on my behalf, thoroughly explaining why their fines were legally baseless and warning them that continued harassment could result in a countersuit. She cited specific case law regarding HOA authority and homeowner rights. Gerald called me 2 days later. "Ryan, I am so sorry about this. The fine letter went out without full board approval. Karen drafted it and sent it using the HOA's letterhead. When the rest of us found out, we were furious. The board is meeting tonight to discuss removing her as vice president." "She sent it without authorization?" I asked, shocked. "Yes, she has been acting increasingly erratic. Several board members are concerned that she is abusing her position. We are going to have a serious discussion about her future with the HOA." The emergency board meeting that night was well attended. Word had spread about Karen's unauthorized fine letter, and many homeowners showed up to voice their concerns. People shared stories of Karen's behavior over the past few years. The elderly woman Dorothy stood up and tearfully described how Karen had made her feel like a criminal in her own home over trivial matters like a garden gnome and a bird feeder that Karen deemed visual clutter. The board voted 4-1 to remove Karen as vice president. Karen herself was the only dissenting vote. She stormed out of the meeting shouting about betrayal and ignorance, vowing that the neighborhood would descend into chaos without her leadership. I felt relieved, but also strangely hollow. This whole thing had taken up so much mental energy for nearly a month, and now it was just over. Life returned to normal. Karen stopped patrolling the neighborhood. In fact, I barely saw her at all anymore. Her husband, a quiet man named Doug who I had always felt sorry for, told Sam that Karen had become depressed and spent most of her time inside. January passed, then February. The neighborhood seemed more relaxed without Karen's constant surveillance. People started expressing themselves more. One family painted their front door a cheerful yellow color. Another family installed a decorative fountain in their yard. These were things that Karen would have fought tooth and nail to prevent, claiming they violated some vague aesthetic standard. In March, I saw a for sale sign go up in front of Karen's house. Sam told me that she and Doug were moving to a condo in Denver where they would not have to deal with HOA drama because they would not be in charge of one. I felt a little guilty, wondering if I had driven her away, but mostly I felt relieved. The house sold quickly, and in April a young couple with 2 small children moved in. They were friendly and easygoing. The wife, Ashley, came over to introduce herself and mentioned that they had heard about the great Christmas light battle of Meadowbrook Hills from their realtor. Apparently, it had become a local legend. "I just want you to know that we think what you did was awesome," Ashley said. Standing up to bullies is important, even when the bully is your HOA. At the next board meeting, Gerald proposed formally amending the HOA covenant to include specific, reasonable guidelines for holiday decorations that protected homeowner freedom while preventing genuinely excessive or dangerous displays. The measure passed unanimously, and a draft was circulated to all homeowners for feedback before being put to a community vote. The new rule, which was approved in May, stated that holiday decorations were allowed from 30 days before the holiday through 7 days after, that they must meet electrical safety codes, and that they could not include offensive imagery or messaging. There was no specific limit on the number of lights because, as the rule stated, such determinations were arbitrary and unenforceable. It was a common-sense rule that gave people freedom while preventing actual problems. Summer arrived, and life in Meadowbrook Hills was peaceful. I focused on my work, spent time with friends, and enjoyed my house without drama. But as autumn approached and Halloween decorations started appearing in yards throughout the neighborhood, I began thinking about Christmas. Part of me wanted to just put up a simple, normal display. I had made my point. Karen was gone. The rules had been changed. There was no reason to go overboard again. But another part of me remembered the joy on children's faces as they drove by my house. I remembered the thank you notes from families. I remembered feeling like I was creating something magical and wonderful in the midst of all the conflict. In November, I started planning my Christmas display. This time, I would do it right. I would create something not out of spite or defiance, but purely for the joy of it. I researched professional lighting techniques. I bought programmable LED systems that could create animated patterns and color changes. I designed a display that would tell a story, with different sections of my yard depicting different scenes from Christmas tradition. I started decorating the day after Thanksgiving, which was within the new rules. Over the following week, I created an elaborate display that included an animated light show synchronized to Christmas music that played through outdoor speakers. I had a section with dancing lights that looked like the northern lights, another section that created the illusion of falling snow, and a central display featuring a large illuminated Christmas tree made entirely of lights on a frame. The display drew even bigger crowds than the previous year. But this time, there was no drama, no angry HOA vice president taking photos and measurements, no violation notices. Just families enjoying something beautiful, children experiencing wonder, and neighbors coming together over shared joy. On Christmas Eve, I was outside adjusting some lights when Gerald walked by walking his dog. "You know, what you did last year really changed this neighborhood," he said. "Not just the rule changes, though those were important. You reminded people that HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not control it. We have had more participation in board meetings, more volunteers for neighborhood events, and more community spirit than ever before. So thank you." "I just really like Christmas lights," I said with a smile. But I knew what he meant. Sometimes standing up to unreasonable authority, even over something as simple as Christmas lights, matters. It matters because it pushes back against the human tendency to control and dominate. It matters because it defends the small freedoms that make life worth living. It matters because it reminds us that communities should be built on joy and cooperation, not rules and fear. That evening, sitting on my porch with hot chocolate and watching the animated light display I had created, I felt genuinely happy. Not the vindictive happiness of winning a fight, but the deep contentment of doing something good for no reason other than because it brings joy to others. The local newspaper ran a story about my display in their holiday edition. The article focused on how holiday decorations can bring communities together and mentioned my story as an example of homeowner advocacy leading to positive change. They interviewed several families who had made it a tradition to drive through Meadowbrook Hills to see my lights. One mother said that her autistic son, who usually struggled with holiday chaos, found peace and happiness staring at my animated light displays. That quote made me tear up a little. The article also mentioned the HOA rule changes, quoting Gerald about the importance of community-focused governance. There was a brief mention of the previous conflict, but no naming of Karen specifically, which I appreciated. The point was not to shame anyone, but to celebrate positive outcomes. In January, after I took down my decorations, I received an email from the president of a homeowner rights advocacy group in Colorado. They had read the newspaper article and wanted to feature my story in their newsletter as an example of successful homeowner pushback against HOA overreach. They also invited me to speak at their annual meeting about my experience. I agreed, and in February, I found myself standing in front of about 200 people at a hotel conference room in Denver, telling my story. I talked about the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, getting community support, and standing firm on principle. I also emphasized the importance of not letting conflicts become purely personal. The goal was not to destroy Karen, but to protect my rights and change bad policies. The speech was well received, and afterwards several people came up to share their own HOA horror stories. One man told me about fighting for a year to get permission to install solar panels. A woman described being fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of mailbox. A young couple explained how they were nearly forced to remove a wheelchair ramp they had built for their disabled daughter because it did not match the architectural aesthetic of the neighborhood. These stories reinforced my belief that HOAs, while sometimes necessary for maintaining shared spaces and basic standards, often become vehicles for petty tyranny. The key to preventing that is homeowner engagement and willingness to push back against unreasonable demands. Spring came again, and life continued peacefully in Meadowbrook Hills. The new family in Karen's old house became good friends of mine. Their kids loved playing in their yard without someone monitoring their every move. The neighborhood felt lighter, more relaxed, more like an actual community rather than a controlled experiment in suburban conformity. I ran into Karen one day at the grocery store in Aurora. It was awkward. She was in the produce section, examining avocados with the same intense scrutiny she had once applied to neighborhood covenant violations. She saw me, and for a moment I thought she might just ignore me and walk away. But instead, she approached. "Ryan," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Karen, how are you?" "I am doing okay. The condo is nice, less maintenance." She paused, struggling with something. "I wanted to say that I am sorry for how things went last year. I was dealing with some personal issues and I think I took them out on the neighborhood, on you especially." I was stunned. This was not what I had expected. "I appreciate you saying that. I know I did not make things easy either. You stood up for yourself. There is nothing wrong with that. I just wish I had been able to see things more clearly at the time." She shifted her grocery basket to her other hand. "Doug and I are seeing a marriage counselor. Turns out I have been using control and rules to deal with anxiety for years. It is something I am working on." "That is good," I said, genuinely meaning it. "I hope things get better for you." We parted ways after that brief conversation, and I realized that even Karen had been a victim in her own way. A victim of her own need to control everything, of anxiety that manifested as aggression, of a system that gave her just enough authority to make everyone miserable, including herself. As December approached again, I started planning my third annual Christmas display. This time, I wanted to involve the community. I sent an email through the neighborhood listserv inviting anyone who wanted to participate in a coordinated Christmas light display throughout the entire subdivision. I offered to share my design software and lighting techniques with anyone interested. The response was overwhelming. 20 families signed up to participate. We had meetings where we planned color schemes and themes for different streets. Sam and I organized a bulk purchase of lights to get everyone discounts. Dorothy, the elderly woman who had supported me during the conflict with Karen, became the unofficial project coordinator, managing schedules and making sure everyone had what they needed. The result was spectacular. Meadowbrook Hills became known throughout Aurora as the Christmas Light District. News crews came to film segments. The City Tourism Board featured us in their holiday events guide. But more importantly, the project brought the neighborhood together in a way nothing else had. We had built something beautiful as a community. On Christmas Eve of that third year, we organized a neighborhood caroling event that culminated in the community center with hot chocolate and cookies. Over 100 people attended. Kids ran around with light-up toys. Adults chatted and laughed, and everyone felt connected to something larger than themselves. Gerald gave a short speech thanking everyone for making Meadowbrook Hills such a special place to live. He mentioned how far the neighborhood had come in terms of community spirit and participation. He did not mention Karen or the conflict from 2 years ago, but everyone knew what he was referring to. As I stood there surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, looking at children playing and families enjoying themselves, I thought about how strange the journey had been. It started with spite and defiance, with me adding 50 lights per day just to prove a point to an unreasonable person. But it evolved into something much more meaningful. It became about community, about shared joy, about pushing back against the small tyrannies that diminish our lives. The Christmas lights had been a symbol, a visible manifestation of the right to express ourselves and find joy in our own ways. But they had become more than that. They had become a catalyst for positive change, a reminder that standing up for what is right, even in small ways, can ripple outward in unexpected directions. In January, the HOA board asked me to join as a member. Michelle was stepping down after 3 years of service, and they wanted someone who understood the importance of balancing standards with freedom, rules with common sense. I accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to continue shaping the neighborhood in a positive direction. My first action as a board member was to propose a comprehensive review of all HOA rules, with the goal of eliminating or modifying any that were overly restrictive or based on subjective aesthetic judgments. We formed a committee of board members and homeowners to go through the covenant page by page. The process took months, but by summer we had streamlined the rules significantly, focusing on genuine safety issues and shared property maintenance while removing most of the petty restrictions that had made people feel like they were living under constant surveillance. The changes were put to a homeowner vote and passed with over 80% approval. People were thrilled to have more freedom to personalize their properties. Paint colors diversified beyond the previous approved palette of boring beiges and grays. Gardens flourished with vegetables and wildflowers instead of just the approved ornamental shrubs. Kids' basketball hoops appeared in driveways without anyone getting violation notices. Property values, contrary to Karen's dire predictions, actually increased. Turns out people like living in neighborhoods where they feel free and supported, not controlled and monitored. The sense of community we had built made Meadowbrook Hills a desirable place to live, and homes sold quickly whenever they came on the market. I served on the HOA board for 3 years, working with Gerald and the other members to maintain a light touch while keeping the neighborhood pleasant and functional. We focused on the things that actually mattered, like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and addressing genuine safety concerns while letting people live their lives without micromanagement. When I eventually stepped down from the board, I felt satisfied that we had built something sustainable. The culture of the neighborhood had fundamentally changed. New board members came in with the same philosophy of service rather than control, community rather than conformity. I still live in Meadowbrook Hills. Every Christmas, I put up an elaborate light display, and many of my neighbors do the same. We have become a legitimate holiday destination, with the city even adding our neighborhood to their official map of Christmas light displays. Families come from all over the Denver metro area to drive through our streets and experience the magic we create. Sometimes I think about that first day when Karen marched across the street to tell me my 300 lights were excessive. I think about how angry and insulted I felt, and how that anger drove me to add 50 more lights every single day just to prove a point. It seems almost petty in retrospect, yet it led to something genuinely good. The lesson I took from the whole experience is that sometimes the right response to unreasonable authority is not compliance or compromise, but defiance. Not defiance for its own sake, but defiance in service of principle. Standing up for your rights, even over something as trivial as Christmas lights, matters because it pushes back against the slow creep of control that can suffocate communities and spirits. It also taught me that conflict, when handled correctly, can be a catalyst for positive change. If I had simply removed my lights when Karen first complained, the HOA would have continued down its path of increasing restrictions. Other homeowners would have continued to feel powerless. The neighborhood would have remained a place of rules and fear rather than joy and community. Instead, by standing firm and rallying support, we changed the fundamental character of where we lived. We created a place where people feel free to express themselves, where neighbors support each other, where community is built through shared experiences rather than enforced conformity. Last year, I received a Christmas card from Karen and Doug. It was a simple card with a generic holiday message, but inside Karen had written a personal note. She thanked me for forcing her to confront her behavior, and said that the changes in her life since moving had been difficult but ultimately positive. She wrote that she had learned to let go of her need to control everything and had found more peace as a result. She ended with a simple line: "I am sorry for what I put you through, but I am grateful for where it led." I found that note touching and put the card on my mantle alongside the others I received. It reminded me that everyone, even someone as seemingly unreasonable as Karen had been, is fighting their own battles and capable of growth. This December will be my 6th Christmas in Meadowbrook Hills. My light display is already planned, featuring new animated elements and a synchronized musical component that will be even more impressive than previous years. My neighbors are excited, children are counting down the days, and the whole neighborhood is buzzing with holiday spirit. The shelves in my garage are stacked with bins of Christmas lights, carefully organized and labeled. When I look at them, I do not just see decorations. I see symbols of freedom, of community, of the importance of standing up for what is right. I see the physical manifestation of a simple truth, that joy and beauty and self-expression are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems silly or small. Because sometimes the smallest battles are the most important ones. Sometimes defending your right to hang Christmas lights is really about defending your right to live without fear of petty tyranny. Sometimes adding 50 more lights every day is not just spite, but rather a declaration that you will not be controlled, you will not be silenced, and you will not surrender your freedom to someone else's arbitrary standards. Karen reported my Christmas lights count, trying to exert control and enforce rules that did not exist. So I added 50 more lights just to prove my point daily. But in the process, I proved a much bigger point. That communities thrive when people stand up for their rights, that joy is stronger than control, and that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply being yourself and encouraging others to do the same. As I sit here now, planning this year's display and thinking about the journey that started with such conflict and led to such positive outcomes, I feel grateful. Grateful for the neighbors who supported me, grateful for the community we built together, grateful for the lessons learned, and yes, even grateful for Karen and the conflict she created. Because without that initial push, that moment of unreasonable authority meeting stubborn resistance, none of the good that followed would have happened. Meadowbrook Hills is now a place where people want to live, where families feel at home, where children can be children and adults can express themselves without constant surveillance and judgment. It is a place where Christmas lights are celebrated rather than counted, where joy is encouraged rather than restricted, where community matters more than conformity. And it all started because someone tried to tell me I had too many Christmas lights. So I added 50 more, and then 50 more, and then 50 more again, until the whole neighborhood was transformed by light and the spirit of standing up for what is right. That is a story worth telling, a battle worth fighting, and a point worth proving, one string of 50 lights at a time.